This guy was lynched right outside the courthouse where he had been on trial. The mob actually stormed into the courthouse, pulled him out, and lynched him on a tree right outside the courthouse as the judge came out to watch. So again, this is not like a society of law in any real way. Not if the color of your skin is dark. That was a man, a human being, tortured, mutilated, and almost unrecognizable. And are any of these people concerned about being arrested because I'm in the photograph? No. No, not a concern at all. That's a man who they're about to light on fire and burn his body. And that guy's propping his body up with a stick so they can take photographs. This guy is being stretched on a tripod rack so that they could pull his limbs out of his sockets. And again, note how public all this is, right? Nobody's concerned. They are murdering someone in public. And nobody's concerned about the law. Here, they're preparing to put the guy in his coffin. Murderers, milling all around, posing for the photograph, unconcerned with consequences. Some black Southerners talked about the strange fruit that grew on Southern trees. Hanging black people. The idea of strange fruit in the later period is made into a kind of haunting song. And the idea of strange fruit becomes much more popular later on. That was a man, a human being, now burnt to ash. As the crowd stands around his smoldering remains. Now sometimes, like this lynching that I told you about at the courthouse, this lynching was, in a way, spontaneous. The guy was on trial. There was a crowd of white people outside the courtroom, and they're drinking whiskey, they're talking to each other, and somebody finally says, "That courtroom's too good for him, let's go get him." Right? And they kind of storm in, they take him out of the courtroom. But other times lynchings were planned. They were coordinated. They were scheduled. They were made into big events, into spectacles of their own. Historians have called these kind of scheduled, huge crowd lynchings spectacle lynchings. And it was, in a twisted, dark way, a form of 19th century entertainment for the twisted people in the crowd. You can see here thousands of people in the street. You see that arrow up there? That arrow is pointing to the hanging black man that they're all there to see. And you can barely identify him in the picture. Sometimes, railroad companies set up special trains, specially scheduled trains, to bring people to the lynching. Newspapers published announcements. The Negro criminal will be lynched at the fairgrounds at noon tomorrow. This is in the newspaper. And who should stop this? The police, the law. But that's not going to happen. Families sometimes packed picnic baskets and brought their children to go make a day of it, to watch a human being be slowly tortured. That's a man on fire, tied to railroad ties. And what are the people in the crowd doing? Grinning, smiling, posing for a photograph. And again, the murderers who were doing these things called it justice, as they put on the scaffold here. Justice. Because the way they talk about it, courtrooms are too good for the Negro criminals that they're bringing justice to. That was a man. That was a human being. Roasted all day and posing for the photograph. And how would you describe that guy? Any ideas? Anybody got an adjective for him?
Proud.
Look at his face.
Proud.
Smug, proud, content. He's clearly pleased with himself and what he spent all day doing here. And the sickest of these sick, I almost said a really bad word that would have been recorded. The sickest of these sick people then took these photographs and made them into postcards. Postcards that they sent through the United States mail to their friends and family members to show them what was happening back home. Both of these postcards are from the lynching of Sam Hose. But right here at the moment, I can't bring myself to tell you the Sam Hose story. So there you go. You're not going to get it. Where is this happening? Illinois. Remember I said almost all lynchings happen in the South, right? But not all. This is in Illinois. Look at that crowd in the streets. When lynchings did happen outside the South, there was in a way more excitement in the crowd. Because what was everybody in the crowd thinking?
This is the first time we see it?
Exactly, and probably the only time we'll ever see it. Unlike in the South, where, you know, in some parts of the South, you're like, oh, another lynching, I'm going to sit this one out. Right? But in a place like this, it was like a once-in-a-lifetime chance. This is in Minnesota. And again, note the kids crowding to get into the picture. I know I just told you that the sickest of the sick made postcards, but maybe we found another level of sickness. This guy took a photograph of their victims, then cut off part of one of their hair, and put it in the frame with the matted photograph of their victims, and kept it up in his house. And yeah, maybe that's actually sicker than a postcard. I don't know. We're comparing levels of sickness. I'm getting lost. This is the lynching that Davidson opens the They Say book with. Are you reading that one? And so this was the lynching of Laura Nelson and her son, who are, you see here, hanging from this bridge. Black women were rarely lynched, but sometimes were, like in this case. Just quickly, the story. Laura Nelson was being raped by a white man, and her teenage son came in and beat the man off of her. And the white man then went and got a mob and said that that teenage boy had assaulted him. And the mob came and lynched Laura Nelson and her son and hung them from the bridge. Which meant, as the author talks about at the beginning, the photographer had to get into a boat, position himself at just the right angle to take the photograph and get the whole crowd in it. And this one, too, was made into a postcard. You may have noticed now a theme. Who did white people feel like they had to bring to lynchings?
Children.
Children. That was a critical part of the whole experience. In a way, I don't know if this makes sense, if you get what I'm trying to say, but in the South, white people never felt more white than at a lynching. And this is where you pass white supremacy down to your kids. Because nobody's born being a white supremacist. You have to shape that person's mind. And that's what all this is doing to these kids. So this lynching here is from 1935. And look at that little girl, smiling, proud of her daddy. When she grows up in the 1950s, is she going to fight integration?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, integration?
Integration.
Yeah.
You bet. Actually, I don't know what she does when she grows up, but I would bet you she's going to fight integration. So bringing children was critical for training the next generation to maintain white supremacy. What Wells was really after with all this activism and research was an anti-lynching law. She wanted the Congress to make lynching a federal crime. If lynching was a federal crime, who'd be responsible for punishing lynchers?
Federal government.
Right. Not who, as it is now. Not the states. Because clearly, is Mississippi ever going to punish a lyncher? No. But if we could make it a federal law, we'd have a better chance of actually punishing the murderers. Congress never passed the anti-lynching bill that Wells wanted. In fact, I think it's really impressive that she managed to get them to bring it to a vote. It failed, but she got it brought to a vote in the U.S. Congress. So she didn't get what she was most after, a federal anti-lynching bill. But her efforts made lynching less common. Her efforts helped make lynchings less frequent. Because all of her work gave the South bad publicity. She showed that lynchings overall were not about white women. They had nothing to do with white women in most cases. What all this meant was that, remember how when we started I said that a white northerner might ask a white southerner what question?
Why are you doing that?
Why do you lynch all those black people, right? And white southerners always say what?
Protect white women?
Protecting white women. But now, after Wells has circulated all this propaganda, what would a white northerner maybe say to that?
That doesn't seem so.
Right. They might say, that's not true, actually. I've read your own accounts from your own newspapers, and it's not about white women. And so after 1900, lynchings became less common. They did not stop, because we just saw one from 1935, right? But lynchings became less frequent. And the big shift after 1900 was that the law was less likely to give prisoners to the mobs. That's the big shift. Police and prisons were less likely to hand people over to mobs. Instead, what would that accused black criminal get?
Unfair trial.
An unfair trial.